All right, welcome everybody back to the Death by Tyranny podcast, second show of the night, just because I wanted to talk about something and I got off the rails trying to drive the point home that one of these days you'll have to understand that in the Civil War we were based or not based, but we still had the same kind of conflict where it was, are we actually going to be able to take other Americans' lives? And there was a lot of justification that had to be put in place for that to happen. And the DNC has been doing their part to make conservatives dehumanized and for their half of the country to be able to handle what they need to handle. But conservatives in a whole just want to pussyfoot around it about saying that they aren't willing to take other Americans' lives. So I kind of went down that rabbit hole. I meant to go down more of the economy, how bad the stock market's doing, how bad crypto's doing, and what kind of position we are going to be faced in reality, not just hopes and dreams. We get stuck as conservatives almost in the same sense as libertarians, where we want to hope for this bubblegum rainbow dreamland that just isn't reality. And to keep me kind of on topic, I brought back a good friend. I can't remember your OH Corey. There we go. We'll go with that because that's what it says on Discord. So what's up, dude?
Not much. How's it going?
I'm all right. So we were kind of talking off the live about how shitty things are getting, and just
So you were.
go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Well, you were saying how um you didn't think the red wave was going to happen, and I've worked for two campaigns this year. Well, really last year and this year, which was the Blystone campaign and the JD Vance campaign. And at a low level, I've worked at a low level. And with the JD Vance campaign, when I do the call logs, which we do twice a week, JD Vance really doesn't have a whole lot of support from older people. And if you're familiar with voting demographics and voting trends and the Republican Party, you'll know that older people, the baby boomer generation, is like basically what carries the party, especially when you're talking about like local elections and like district elections. So one thing I've noticed is a lot of the older Republican types, they are not really into JD Vance at all. I don't really know why. Most of them will just, usually they're quick to hang up after they tell me that they're not, pro JD Vance, but basically a lot of them say they've heard bad things about him. Like usually that's what you hear. So
What are some
but
of the bad things they're referring to, do you think?
um from what I've seen, I know that in the past he was basically anti-Trump during the 2016 election. So I'm assuming some of that is it. The other thing too is he actually is sort of, he went to an Ivy League school, and he sort of is kind of in that academic sort of world. He wrote a book called, what was it? It was something like Hillbilly Ideology or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people, like the guy that manages the local campaign in Montgomery County, he he says he like loved the book, but again, this is like a college kid, rich parents, went to a university and reads this guy's book, but actual working class people, right? Hillbilly Ideology is the book that he wrote. Actual working class people, if you read the book, it's obvious he has no idea how working class people think. And he's talking about Ohioans too, which is really funny because Ohioans don't think at all in the way that he tries to say, and he tries to kind of explain like Trumpism and things like that. And he kind of does a pretty bad job of doing it because he's just totally disconnected.
So yeah, so you think it's just more so less a demographic disconnect?
Uh, I mean, the boomer generation has been so badly subverted by these like con artist types in the Republican Party, like Ben Shapiro, Jordan Peterson, these types who just like con them out of money. They don't actually, they're not actually like worth anything. They don't actually do anything. They don't really have any kind of successful influence over the party. They just are, that's why they call it Con Inc., right? They're just conning people out of their money, making money off of these old people. And then these old people, like, they wonder why they're stuck with like Mitch McConnell. Well, you're getting conned out of all your money, you're getting conned out of all your influence. And most of them don't even realize that it's happening. So uh, a lot of them, I think, are kind of tired of it. They're seeing no change, even though it is their fault, right? Because they're not doing anything with like a group like America First. They're essentially like going down, dead ends with like Ben Shapiro and stuff. So
I did kind of go off on this rabbit hole a little bit in saying that I don't necessarily think that a new party is a good idea. I think we've seen enough in the past that just the Libertarian Party alone can drive enough um, popularity, enough votes to make some type of a negative impact on the direction the country actually needs to go. However, people amongst the conservatives in the Republican Party can make very, I guess it would kind of be seen as outlandish statements enough to the point where it totally makes them change directions. So you're not necessarily getting a new party per se, but you're getting a new ideology amongst the party. And my kind of example for this was no matter how you feel about Trumpism, it had a huge impact on the Republican Party. And how that came about was he came into the arena and said, let me be the Republican nominee or I'll run independent. And I don't think he would have won independent, but he knew he had enough impact amongst those conservatives that if he made such a bold claim that they would kind of take the bait, and they did, and he won, and it totally changed the game as far as
yeah.
how conservatives
Well, in
viewed the country.
Trump also, I think Trump really laid a path for like people that think like us to break into like mainstream politics, which is you have to take over the party that already exists, right? It's like, are we going to reinvent the wheel, or are we going to use one of the two wheels that are functioning, right?
Hmm.
And sadly, one of the two wheels that's functioning that closest aligns with like a Christian nationalist, I would say I am, or like a paleo conservative, which I partially am. Uh, the Republican Party is obviously our best option, even though sort of these neocons have taken it over, these like Bush era type politicians who still haven't been purged from the ranks. They're still actually the majority. If you actually look at it, how they vote, how they react, they are still very much a Bush era Republican Party. Trump sort of dragged them in one direction, but now that we have the Biden administration, it's pretty clear the way they act and the way they behave that they are reverting back to Bush era politics, sort of Reagan. Uh, I'd say post Reagan, but still, I'd say Reagan was like a negative influence on the Republican Party, absolutely. So they seem to like want to um, behave in that sort of a way, as opposed to what Trump changed it to.
Yeah, but
So
do you think at any point that enough people are going to see what the majority of Republicans that have been elected into their positions are doing, that they're going to steer away from the Republican Party? And do you
uh,
really think all of them have? played into enough of the game to actually be able to keep what they're referring to, like MAGA Republicans, out of the races. That's why I think
Um,
there might not be a red wave, because I think the Republican Party
no,
is low key fighting against us.
I think you're onto something, and I think you're correct in your like sort of gut instinct. Um, yeah, I don't think like the Trump base is at all like active, and the only way that they are is that Biden is terrible, right? That's the only thing that Republicans are going off of right now. Like I get on Facebook and like you see these videos of like Marco Rubio begging people to like vote for him and show up to his events, but what does Marco Rubio represent? He represents this new age neocon bullshit politics, which is, uh, let's keep having immigrants flood into the country and fundamentally change it. Let's fundamentally change demographics, but let's just do it legally, right? And it's just all the same things Democrats are doing. It's just like, well, let's just brush it up and make it more like digestible for baby boomers. That's what these Republicans are doing essentially. They're heading in the same direction. They're just dressing it up in a way that old baby boomers, Republican conservatives, could basically be tricked into voting for them. And the other thing is too, uh, I've because I work for the JD Vance campaign, like, or sorry, do volunteer work. Um, I get a lot of sort of campaign text messages and emails, and it's just pathetic. I mean, what the Republicans are putting out there, it's absolutely pathetic. They're not openly Christian. They don't want to talk about that. They don't want to talk about like immigration in any real way. They don't want to talk about like anything that Trump ran on. They don't want to talk about trade. They don't want to talk about tariff. They want to talk about like, well, a woman is a woman, not a man. I mean, it's just that they are so ridiculous. They're so pathetic. Nobody's going to be energized to vote for these people. I got a text the other day, okay, and it's like from Georgia, some woman from Georgia, and she's literally running on the fact that she's black and a woman.
Mhm.
I mean, literally, I'm a black conservative woman, and I was a veteran.
That's what
Well, I
that's
mean,
what I'm afraid of, that with the
exactly,
economy
and no,
being so bad that we might be duped into voting for a conservative Obama.
right. Well, and the thing is, I'm seeing a lot of ads for like local elections, and oddly enough, none of them are from Ohio, but it's people who are like military, ex-military, and I know that a lot of people, the whole blind patriotism needs to come to a stop, because what we've seen is a lot of these military sort of careerists have done is they've built a career in the military. A lot of them get into intelligence, which what does military intelligence do? I mean, look at what our military intelligence has done in the Middle East. They've subvert populations. They create proxy wars by subverting people into fighting for whatever reason, and that reason can be anything. They just need to mobilize these people to fight for whatever they're trying to do. Well, why are these very same people running in local politics? Like, you got to think, like, these are people who are experts in subversion. These are people who are experts in psychological warfare, and they're running as Republican candidates. That's not a good thing, right? Anybody coming from like the current military apparatus and going into politics, we need to be extremely wary of. Basically, anybody from the late 90s to now who's been in the military, and I'm not talking about like a soldier, right? I'm talking about like these careerist
Generals.
military people, like officers, things like this.
Mhm.
Even the SEALs, like any kind of special forces too, because a lot of the time, those guys, like what they actually were doing is concealed. And like guys like Joe Kent, like they are essentially CIA goons, and they're going in as Republicans and they're subverting people. And you can see it once you get an eye for it, you can see what they're doing.
Hmm.
It's just like what Fox News does. They'll take something that is real and conservative, and then they'll slowly kind of chip away at, like, well, it's like I said earlier, you know, we want massive amounts of immigrants that's going to turn this country into Brazil in 2 generations. We just want them to do it legally. Well, regardless of what happens, if mass migration keeps happening, people listening right now, your children, your grandchildren, they're going to live in Brazil. They're going to live in Mexico. This country will be transformed into something like Mexico, into something like Brazil. And whether it's legal immigration or illegal immigration that's bringing you to that point, you need to ask yourself, do you want your children, do you want your grandchildren, do you want your descendants to live in a third world country like Brazil? Because that's what's happening. And both parties are selling you that.
Well, at the end of the day, I think that all of this derives from the exact same underlining causing issue. I talked about it before, and it's going to hark back to the disconnect into graphics, or and it's going to connect with the military people running, and it's also going to come into play when you talk about the Republicans fighting against the MAGA Republicans. What the problem is here, and it also is plays a big factor in the gun community. Why you have the civilians fight against the military people, even though you have a large portion of them that both agree on a lot of topics. It's because nobody will come to the table and just say what needs to be said. When it comes to
Right.
the Trumpism, they will tell you, I don't like Trump as a person, but I liked a lot of the things that he did. Okay, so you agree with Christian nationalism? Absolutely not. Nationalism is something that brought Nazism to its peak, and it's like, okay, well then you
Well,
don't agree with Trump because what his good ideas, the ones that actually did something for this country, were Christian nationalism. And when you talk about the military thing, the military people running could be a good thing, but you know that they're distant, like disingenuous straight out of the gate. Well, how do I know that? Because the first thing they say is they want to talk about their work ethic. Well, there's plenty of civilians that have just as hard of a ethic, if not better. Because
way better.
when
Well,
you
what are
have,
these people look at the videos coming out of the military. They're dancing on TikTok. I mean, it's pathetic. It is embarrassing. The Russians are like beating the shit out of each other in training, like hardening each other, like throwing each other in like ice-covered lakes and shit. And our military, like our guys are like kissing each other and deep throating bananas. And that's not a joke.
well,
Like there's hours of footage of this stuff. Like fucking around.
it goes way beyond that.
They're
It's not even
crashing
about
the
the
natives. They're running into like they're crashing the jets because they're stupid, they're untrained, the standards are low, because honestly the standard of American has been lowered.
Well, it's not just, well, they're trying that's their best seller, right? The work ethic. But yet
Right.
in the same breath, they will tell you the biggest issue that the military faces is transitioning back into civilian life. Because if they don't have everything handed to them, then they lose that purpose. That's why that
Yeah,
transition is hard. So they don't really have the work ethic they would like to believe they have. But the biggest problem
I
that I
agree.
think that they have, and why we should be weary of military service members coming into politics, is because what did they tell you? What's one of their other greatest features? Multiculturalism. That
Right.
multiculturalism has been proven time and time again in the military. Your biggest um, example of multiculturalism being what is best for this country is portrayed in the military. And that's not true. That's where the disingenuousness comes in. The
Right.
military is not about multiculturalism. It is about taking people of all ethnicities, races, religions, and wiping that away and making one culture. So it's not multiculturalism in the military. It's one fucking military culture, period. That is
Well,
why
that's
it
how it
works.
used to be. I would say the past couple of years, like especially as soon as Biden went in, he immediately started purging the military. And then after the initial purge, which the initial purge, if you remember, they used January 6th as the reason why, right? So they started going after people who supported January 6th. They started going after people who were openly Trump supporters. Then they started going after people who didn't take the vaccine. So effectively, they removed a lot of people, not only from the military, but from military contractor perspective, like contractors in engineering, contractors with actual weapons, contractors as in like mercenary contractors. All these people were let go. So what you're left with is either centrists, some conservatives that just don't vocalize anything and took the vaccine, or this new age liberal bullshit. And that's why you're seeing all these videos, these pathetic, embarrassing videos, while Russia's putting out like hardcore things, right? They're showing their training, they're showing their enlistments, they're showing their effectiveness on the battlefield too. And you got to ignore this mainstream like Western media nonsense. The Russians very much are defeating the Ukrainians. The Russians are on their second, they just activated their second wave of deployment, right? The Ukrainians are on their seventh wave of deployment. And
with
that
all
seventh
the
wave
world
is people
backings
being
too.
forced to do it. The Ukrainian army has already been destroyed, totally destroyed by the Russians. And the Ukrainian army was the biggest army in Europe, so other than Russia. So the point is, the United States does not have this military supremacy that people think. We have all these gadgets, and if you talk to actual soldiers, if you talk to people who have enlisted, they'll tell you that the quality of the shit that we have, yeah, it may have $1 million chips in them, it may have this and that. They suck. They don't work right. The stuff's cheap. It's like breaking on them. A lot of stuff is not even ready for service.
Well, we've talked about, well, at least I have, in the gun community, it's starting to change. It not so much when you talk about like the FUDs, right? But for a long time, you had people that only wanted mil spec stuff, right? This is mil spec. That's the cream of
Mm.
the crop. Until people actually started to figure out that mil spec didn't mean shit.
Yeah, it
Mil
doesn't mean
spec,
anything. Those M9s were trash. They would recycle the M9s for like 2 decades. They recycled the M9s and they were garbage. They would jam on them all the time. Even our like what was it, the F-33 fighter? That's trash. It's like the most expensive jet we have, and it's trash. Everyone who's been experienced with it from the top down will tell you that they are trash. I
well,
was
I
just
mean,
listening to Scott Ritter earlier, who is a former Marine intelligence guy. And of course, the deep state has smeared him as this or that, but he's one of the guys that's coming out and saying that we cannot, on the ground, we cannot defeat Russia. We cannot defeat a Russian military. We can't. And I mean, he's somebody that served his country, and then he was also part of the UN. He would go in and investigate weapons to make sure that there's nothing illegal going on in like countries like Iraq and things like that. So
well,
anyways, the point is like it's pretty well known that our military is not up to par. We are not like we really are not where we need to be to mobilize or anything.
yeah, but I don't. When getting back to like the one cultured military mindset and the politicians that are coming from the military, we've not even
Right.
begin to see the issues that have trickled into the military trickle back into politics. Um, other
Right.
than the appeasing, like the Joe Kent and his appeasing bullshit, you are going to see some of that appeasing because what he's doing is he's trying to grasp for straws of the people in the military that's still enlisted that are seeing those issues. But there are tons of special operation guys going into politics now that will still back it with work ethic and multiculturalism. And if they would get away from those two topics, they might have a chance. If they would just not say that they were special operations, they would probably be better off. If
Yeah, I mean, some people are seeing that, but the issue is it's like I said at the beginning of the conversation. The boomers, the older people who are like 1 foot, like one toe into politics, barely paying attention. Which actually, that's really everybody. But the
yeah, I was gonna
boomers are the
say
ones
that's the
carrying the
majority.
Republican Party. And because they are the ones carrying the majority of the Republican Party, like doing all the legwork, as in like doing all the voting in the local elections and things, it's really bad because they're easily convinced. I mean, look at who was the followers of Q. It's all boomers. It's all baby boomers because they're easily tricked, and they also grew up in a totally different America. They grew up in an America that was high trust. They grew up in an America where you could like leave your door unlocked when they were kids and shit. And now it's a totally different America, and a lot of them they just don't want to admit that this country is way worse off than when they were children, and they're willing to accept these lies and this nonsense from Republicans that are spoon feeding it to them, and they're voting for these people. So like you can say like me and you can spot these like military intelligence like subverters that have infiltrated the party and are really working for like globalist elites. But these old baby boomers, they don't see that because they're so out of touch with what's actually going on. They're not in the workforce anymore. They're not seeing the fact that like in the past 2 years, I mean, me and you worked at the same job a while back, right? Up until recently. I mean, how quickly in the last 2 years did we start seeing new hires go from normal everyday Ohioans to like third world, like people from the Congo, people from like Somalia, people from like the far reaches, like the most third world, you know, worst places on earth where like it's normal to like kill somebody. One of them pointed a gun at somebody, you know what I mean, at work. So like these baby boomers, they're not seeing like the working class, their descendants are being replaced with like Congolese people. And,
Well,
and it's really tragic because those are the people who we kind of need to mobilize as far as voting.
I still think it all comes back to the same underlining issue. It's that all these people believe, the good you want to talk about the silent majority? They all believe in their like heart of hearts, the truth. But what really like leads me down the doomer path is that even though they believe it, they won't say it. And it's not getting better, it's getting worse to the point where they won't vote for it. They
They're
won't
terrified.
they
They're
won't fight
terrified.
for it.
Well, you got to think of where was the most subversion of like anti right wing in this country, and you could say like right now, which I'd say that's kind of true. But when the baby boomers were young, they were hit with the most hardcore anti right wing, anti traditional propaganda ever. You got to remember that's like where the hippie generation happened. Right when most baby boomers were teenagers, that's when our basically our military intelligence started putting things like LSD out, the hippie movement, all these things to sort of break up traditional values, traditional families. After the baby boomers grew up, attendance plummeted. Then the next generation, Gen X, church attendance plummeted further. Millennials, it went further. Gen Z, it's further. So
Well, that's
basically,
why
they were the first people to really be bombarded with like anti-traditional, anti-right wing, anti-Christian values. And I think a lot of them are realizing what a lot of that partying and fun did to them. And that's also why they're super entitled too. They think they see these kids that are behaving in some cases worse than they did, and I think they realize that in many parts it's their fault. It is their generation's fault because they started the hippie movements. They started the like free love, do drugs, do acid, rock and roll, all this nonsense that destroyed the family in this country.
well, and that's what I guess I'm kinda saying, like, they will still pretend and put on this facade in public that, "Oh, yeah, man, I'm cool. I got my Woodstock T-shirt on."
Yeah,
But deep
exactly. Yes.
but deep down inside, they what they why they can't sleep at night is because they're going through a divorce, uh, you know, either their wife cheated on them or vice versa, or they're addicted to drugs. And so they really desperately are crying for that traditional American family, but then
Yeah.
when they get into public, they say and do the total opposite. And
Well, and here's the thing, can you blame them? I mean, if you look at like if you get on the internet on any kind of right-wing circles that aren't like mainstream Republican, what do you see? You see nothing but videos of baby boomers who are like going into an establishment, they're getting treated like shit because they're old white people and those are the people you're supposed to hate in this country now. And what happens? They get cold cocked in the back by some black kid who knocks them out clean. In some cases, kills them. Like just cold cocks them right in the back of the head. They fall, they crack their head, and they die. And I mean, no wonder they don't want to speak up because they are literally targeted all the time. The number one recipient of racial violence is white old people
yeah,
and
I
Asian
mean,
old people, and it's not white people doing it either.
uh, yeah, but they're back to, it's their fault. Um,
Right.
they keep voting for it. It's like they
It's
they feel
true,
like
it's true. I mean, they are voting for exactly why they're terrified to speak their mind. I mean, they've opened the door for it, and it's like reciprocating.
well, I get into an argument with a lot of people when I either defend or participate in saying like racial shit online, or how I think that gamer words are should
Mhm.
be respected and almost cherished at this point. Because if you had a politician that all they did was walk up on stage and said, Jews rule the deep state, and walked away, that is the politician you want to trust the most, because even if
Yeah, but
what
you
he
know, the
says,
first people to attack him, it would be white baby boomers,
yeah, that's my point exactly. I mean,
and he'd lose. He would never win anything.
it's insane that we're basing our whole lives, our financial futures, our children's security on this idea that we're fighting against the evil other side of this country. In all reality, they've already won to the point where we're so brainwashed
Oh yeah,
that we
yeah.
we
So the
we're not
left,
even fighting against it. We're helping them.
really the left, unless some kind of resurgence happens or some kind of like a disaster, like economic disaster or like I don't want to say natural disaster, but like something like, our electromagnetic field's knocked out. There's no electricity for like, because when our electromagnetic field gets knocked out by like a solar flare or something, there won't be electricity for at least like 4 or 5 years, right? So unless something catastrophic happens like that, all the left has to do is sit back and wait because you're right, they've already won. If you think about it ideologically, even if there's a resurgence of like 10% of people are pushing back against it, which is a lot of people, it doesn't matter because even in 2 generations, like I said earlier, this country will look like Brazil in 2 generations because of the amount of migrants we've allowed in here. This country will look like Brazil and it will act like Brazil. The crime will be exactly the same as Brazil. This will be Brazil.
Yeah, I mean, I think all the people that are holding on to this idea of from my cold dead hands uh type of
Right.
shit, like, you have no line in the sand, because if you did, we'd already be like literally fighting in the streets.
Well, a lot of people don't realize this, but yeah, like a lot of the come and get 'em guns stuff, like a lot of that was already destroyed before I was born. Like if you look at Waco, Ruby Ridge, all that stuff was being challenged. What was going on in Idaho, uh, all of that stuff was being challenged by the federal government in the early to mid 90s, and they won. I mean, even if you look at what happened with the Oklahoma City bombing, that was a total subversion. That was a total plant, and they totally won. And Joe Biden actually wrote um, basically what was the predecessor to the Patriot Act, right? Where uh, if somebody is basically declared a terrorist by the government, they don't have like a right to a lawyer, right to a trial, all these things. That originally was written for American citizens by Joe Biden. And it was voted against, it was shot down right away. But then after 9/11, because the nation was attacked, people were fearful. They passed the actual Patriot Act,
Well,
which
yeah.
even the writer of the Patriot Act, I don't remember his name, but and there's clips of Joe Biden taking full credit for it, which he should take full credit for it. It was his bill. But the guy who wrote the Patriot Act credited it to Joe Biden, and this is all very open. So basically, the whole pry my guns from my cold dead hands, they don't really need to. All they have to do is wait 2 generations and you're going to be dead and you're going to be replaced with people who don't agree with your opinion on guns anyways. Because guess what? The only people who agree with the sentiment on guns in mass, okay? You may be able to find some outliers, but the only people who agree with the Second Amendment en masse are founding stock Americans. And most of those people are Anglo, German, Protestants. Those are the people who agree with those values. And even though I'm Catholic, the majority of basically Western European people who are Protestants are basically the only demographic in this country that believes in the First and Second Amendment as it was written. So, I mean, that's just statistics. And
Well,
I
it's
wish
not only
Catholics,
that. It's proven by
which,
like historical events. Why Jewish people feel the need, no matter how small of a percentage of a population that they are, that they need to be in positions of power, is because of Nazis or World War II or whatever. Well, to think that Protestants don't remember a time, and like you said, it would have to be some type of founding stock in this country, the whole reason they were over here to begin with. And once that idea is lost because it's not taught in school anymore. So,
right. Well, the thing with the Semitic influences in government, that goes all the way back until shortly after Christ departed, when they formed the Talmud. The Talmud is basically a legal text. The Torah, most people, if you talk to most Christians in this country, they think that Jews practice the Torah. They don't. They practice what is called the Talmud. The Talmud is not the Torah, which is obviously is the Old Testament. They believe in the Talmud. The Talmud is legal code essentially. So they see things from a very young age. They're trained to see things from a legalistic perspective and like sort of a leverage and power perspective. So they're naturally sort of akin to go to these positions of power because it's not even a religion really. I mean it is, but it's not spiritual in any way. It is very much materialistic, and it is very much like, I mean, it's kind of cheap to call it satanic, but it's very worldly.
yeah.
So that's why I would say, I mean, certainly they do cite the Holocaust for why they do that, but that's why you see them in the banks. That's why you see them in the Hollywood. That's why they're the ones directing all the commercials. That's why you see them in these positions. They're 2% of American population. They're 30% of our Congress.
Yeah.
There's a reason for that. So
Well, yeah. And
so
not
and I
to
think that's very much ingrained in their beliefs,
but I think other than like the
which is totally
semantics,
opposed to Christianity, by the way. If you read the book Jesus in the Talmud, you will see what's in the Talmud. They do not, they use Christians is what they do. They use Christians to get what they want. And what do they want from Christians? The biggest military in history, which is the United States military. And that's why all of our military is totally Zionist. We're totally pro-Zionist. We protect Israel. All of our wars in the Middle East have been to protect Israel. It's not over oil. It's not over money. We didn't even capture any oil when we went into Iraq. People say that all the time. We went in there for the oil. We did not even capture the oil. We didn't. What we did was we installed a bank, a a central bank that was controlled by them. So and then who was the biggest threat to Israel at that time in the 90s, or sorry, in the early 2000s? It was Saddam. And then right now, who's the biggest threat to Israel, according to the Israelis? It's
Pakistan.
Iran. Well, look at
Well, I
what's
don't know.
happening in Iran right now.
Well, so I was watching an interview of the guy who started Blackwater, and he's a fairly large Trump
The
supporter.
documentary Blackwater?
Not the documentary Blackwater, it was just an interview. He hasn't been interviewed in some time. Ironically enough, a Navy SEAL that runs a podcast got him to come out, and along his interview, and it's like 5 hours, dude, it's incredibly long. But what he was saying was pretty much every aspect of our government, even conservatives, have some type of either Iranian influence in them or Israeli influence. It's almost like we're Americans, and the idea that we need to preserve America is no longer of any concern of the federal government. We're just
Right.
a
Well,
ginormous pawn in the game of Iran and Israel.
well, I don't. I think it's almost ridiculous to even say something like Iran or any kind of Muslims have any influence over the American government. They don't. It is 100% Jewish. 100%. They, I mean, they'll brag about it too. All of the top 10 lobbyists, like top 10 as in spending, lobbyists in this country are all pro-Zionist or they're directly Zionist lobbyists. I mean,
Well,
all the money, all the influence. There was that one. I don't remember his name, so it kind of sounds stupid since I can't cite his name. But I'm sure you remember this being cited. But he was the guy that said he could have like over 200 signatures on a cocktail napkin in support of Israel, like, by like 8 o'clock or whatever he said. Right. And it's true. They do have that much influence over. I mean, they pay for these people's elections. You got to think about that. You put in a couple $1 million into somebody's election. Okay. Those people that you put a couple $1 million into the election for, they have a say over billions of dollars when they vote. So, and where do a lot of our money go? $30 billion a year on average goes to Israel. So, I mean, when you start to look at it that way, it all makes sense.
well, yeah, you're not. It's not a. You're not looking to support a candidate with that kind of financial backing. You're looking for an investment at that point. And I
Right.
think any
Yep.
other view on that is ridiculous. Nobody gives
Yeah.
millions and millions of dollars to any
Which it should be
organization of
illegal.
any kind.
It, it should only individual donors should be allowed. There should be no such thing as PACs. There companies and organizations should not even be allowed to donate or pay for any kind of campaigns in this country at all. But I mean, you're never going to see that change, and it's just like it's like asking, it's like asking like a candy company to stop selling sugar to kids. I mean, that's their whole business, right? You're not going to get them to stop. The way you get them to stop is someone like Trump goes into power and he just stays there and he just starts cutting the heads off of the snakes. Not in a violent way, but you just start firing or arresting some of these people and you keep them in jail and you keep them out of public work and you basically disallow them to have any type of influence over the country, for the rest of their lives. So, I mean, that's what you need to see happen. And people say that's authoritarian, but that's the only way you'll see things return to normality.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be probably, if not the biggest struggle that we're faced politically, because it's just one more thing that you can point to say, hey, you might think you're conservative, but you're brainwashed
Yeah.
because
Oh yeah. The
you
conservatives are
know
way more brainwashed than the liberals. Way more brainwashed.
what needs to happen is for somebody to get a good solid 15, 20-year run at
Yeah.
actually acting on the ideas that they're running on. But at the same time, those same people that know that in their head, if you go, what's the biggest problem with the federal government? You know what they're going to say? Term
What?
limits. We need term limits. We need shorter term limits. Um,
Yep.
so it's like, goddamn, dude.
They'll just. I mean, that would be an improvement, but all it would mean was they're just going to cycle people who agree with them. You need to get it back to like people who actually represent people in their district, people who actually reflect what others think. And honestly, you need like smart, high functioning people in these jobs. A lot of like what we see, people will say it's like a conspiracy. A lot of the things we've been seeing lately is just pure incompetence. Like a lot of things that you're noticing, like especially in the military, like the crashing of the Navy ships. Like how are we going since like the 1940s with no like naval collisions into each other to like now the past 10 years there's been like dozens of crashes where we're totally destroying these huge billion-dollar ships because we're crashing them into each other because everyone's retarded on board. Like, you know what I mean? Like how I don't know if I can say that word on
Well,
on
look,
whatever you're streaming on, but
that's YouTube, Facebook, but I mean, this far into a podcast, nobody really listens to it. Either way, um, so what you're talking about is it actually has like a theory name because it has been proven so many times over the span of existence. It's called Occam's razor, and the theory behind that is there's no need to imply malice when incompetence will suffice. Uh, just
yeah,
just to
and
say that, like, you might think people are doing shit for an evil reason, but it's probably just
right.
because they're stupid. That's literally
Well,
it.
it depends. You just have to use your rationality, right? I mean, some of it is that, and some of it is it's actually just money and influence is the reason why things aren't getting done. So and that's not necessarily evil either. That's just like there are people that have interests that don't align with an everyday American's interest, and they have more money than you. So therefore, they have more power, they have more leverage, they have more say over you. That's what's happening, and it is planned. And then there are also false flags that absolutely I think are planned too. But anyways, we should talk about what's going to happen in Europe. Europe's about to like totally get destroyed.
So which part of it? Germany or Ukraine, Russia, or anybody
Almost
else in the UN? All of it?
like more than half of Europe is almost totally dependent on Russian natural gas to heat their homes in the wintertime. And most of them are boycotting Russia, and there is not enough natural gas in existence that can be mobilized to replace the Russian gas that they've been buying.
I think what's
And
happening right before our very eyes is the end of humanity. How much of humanity will be wiped out, I don't know. But if you take anything that's happening over in Europe and you lead it out a couple of years to its final destination, it's nuclear war, because no matter if you're pro Russia, anti Russia, if you think Russia is actually like a competent superpower, or if you don't, either way, you cannot deny the way that other European countries have handled themselves and their brainwashing, climate bullshit has led them
yeah.
to the point where Russia has them by the balls. So it doesn't
Well,
really matter what they want to do. They either succumb to Russia or they would have to like go full on war with Russia. And at that point, Russia has nukes. If they're getting wiped out, they're wiping out other shit too. So I think we're just seeing
Europe
that
will
play
not be
out.
able to defeat Russia. They won't. Especially, I mean, I doubt China would get involved in any like serious way in Europe unless it starts cutting into their, bottom line. But I do think that um if the United States gets involved um militarily, I do think that China probably will, but the problem the thing that globalism has done even more than nuclear weapons is made it to where like major powers won't go to war with each other because if we go to war and we're on opposite sides of China, China is where most of our things are manufactured. Also, we are where most of China's money comes from. So instantly, overnight, both of our economies will totally be destroyed. Like overnight, the second war is declared between the two of us, our countries will economically be totally destroyed. The yen and the dollar will be totally worthless. It's built between
So
that bond, so it's gonna. if war in Europe does happen, I think it will be local. I think it will be like local European countries versus Russia and Belarus and Eastern Ukraine, which Eastern Ukraine is all pro-Russian anyway. So
I mean, so on this as a whole, I talked about exactly this last night. The idea that the United States is so right now they're transitioning military small arms as well as trying, not really succeeding, but trying to keep up with the technology in superpower warfare. And a lot of
hmm
people think this is because America has this idea that in some time within the next couple of decades that we're going to go to war with another superpower, either being Russia or China. And I don't think that's the case. And my argument for that is it would be ridiculous for us to go to war with China because
yeah,
it would
anything with
wipe
China
out
is totally off the table.
so many of them and so many of us on a scale that we've not seen since like the Black Plague and probably even worse.
Well,
So
it's like I
I
just
just don't
said.
think
It's
it would
like I
ever
said
happen.
too. The battling doesn't matter. The battling doesn't matter, dude. Like we probably wouldn't even make it into much of a battle if we declare war on each other. Our currency is 100% worthless.
Well,
You cannot wage a war when you are totally economically collapsed. And that's what would happen if China and the United States go to war with each other. That's why it will never happen unless the US rebuilds its manufacturing and is self-sufficient again and does not rely on Chinese garbage, Chinese steel, Chinese this, Chinese that, which Chinese steel is just like old American steel that they just take, melt it down and sell it back to us. But anyways, um
I mean
it's impossible. It's economically impossible.
my exact
We
words
wouldn't even
were
need to get to the point where we're killing each other. The countries would crash so fast economically, nobody would be willing to fight, and then you'd be worried about like feeding your family rather than being enlisted in the military. That's worthless now because the money's worthless.
well, my exact words were if it was to get to the point where we were either involved with China or Russia to a point where China would step in, that we would see casualties along the numbers of the Black Plague times 10 without shots even being fired. That's exactly what I said word for word last night. So I think everything that
Yeah,
our military right now is doing to advance in technological warfare is for our own civil population. And I said it sounds a little bit Alex
that
Jonesy, but Alex Jones has always been right because what he does is he thinks outside the box. He's not
right,
thinking of UFOs. He's thinking of what actually is, but just nobody's looking there yet. And
exactly.
from what I can tell, when they're designing new calibers, when they're designing new military small arms, the the driving factors behind those things are almost designed specifically for a civilian population. When you're going up
Yeah.
against a superpower, not on home turf, like if you're going to Afghanistan or Russia, it would benefit, and this has been proven over 20 years, to be lighter, faster, quieter. But what they are developing right now is to be faster, louder, scarier. Well, why would
Well,
you
the
need to
other
be louder
thing,
and scarier? To shock and
right?
awe
Yeah.
civilian populations.
That's absolutely, and honestly, that's probably the more likely case. But the other thing could just be war with Russia. We economically can handle. We basically have no trade with Russia. We've got had them sanctioned since the Soviet Union, heavily sanctioned. So they that's why when the Ukraine war started and they started saying, "Well, we're just going to sanction Russia." We've already had extreme sanctions on Russia. They aren't even allowed to like buy and sell American products in Russia. So basically, I mean, we could go to war with them and there would be no like devastating economic cost. Well, of course there would be an economic cost, but it wouldn't be like going to war with China. That would collapse both of us. That would collapse the entire world's economy, actually. Which I mean,
I agree. I
I
just
do
don't
think
see
that.
I don't see a world in where we go to war with Russia where China doesn't step in and take Russia's side.
Well, I think that well, you got to understand that China and Russia are only allies out of convenience. They are not natural allies at all. As a matter of fact, Russia and China both have conflicting influence in Eurasia and in Northeast Asia. So like Mongolia and those
Afghanistan.
those type of countries, Kazakhstan, all those places. Russia and China are actually kind of, and it's soft. It's not nothing aggressive, but let's say the U.S. does fall from like the unipolar, like the main power in the world. Russia and China could very quickly turn on each other. So I don't think they're as close of allies as people say they are. But I think that if it's localized, if it's just like Europeans versus Russians, I don't think China would. I think there might be a bigger likelihood that China would maybe do something if the US got involved, but how is China going to back up that money? How are they going to get that money that we're feeding them? So if China can figure that out, they'll totally destroy the United States economically by joining a war. You see what I'm saying? So like if they could replace the American consumer base with like let's say India, right? Which there's not enough wealth in India to replace the United States, but let's say there is in 10 years. Then China absolutely could switch to India or like India and Russia combined or like India and most of Europe combined. They could switch to them being their main consumer base, and then they no longer need the US economically, and we need them more than they need us. Then they could declare war on us, and they would not suffer any economic consequences, and all the economic consequences would fall on the United States. But that's going to take a lot of time, and I'm not seeing any of that happening.
I mean, I think China is constantly trying to undermine the United States in a way
Well, of
that
course
is
they are. They have
submissive.
to they have to yeah, but they'll never directly. They have to undermine United States power because the more they can undermine United States power, the more they can start throwing their own weight around. But there will never be a direct conflict between the two of us as long as we're interconnected economically the way we are.
I just, yeah, I guess what I more so meant is you're right. It would be a long time from now. It would have to be where China has even more influence than what they have
But
over here already. And then I don't
yeah,
even foresee them like picking up arms or sending like naval battleships to help Russia,
right.
but just to like secret agent that shit to help
Yeah,
Russia.
so yeah, exactly. So they might do some proxy stuff, and they're already there. I've read a few things that say that like the Chinese have already done some intelligence on the ground in Ukraine. So I'm not saying that that wouldn't happen. I mean, we've done intelligence on the ground for Ukraine on Zelensky's side. So proxy war is totally different. That's not official warfare. So yeah, I'm sure the Chinese would get involved in that, but they don't really do that. Like there's not really very many examples of China doing that. So how effective they would be at doing that, I have no idea. I don't think anyone knows
Well, they're getting ready
except
to
for the
rule.
Chinese.
They're getting ready to rule Afghanistan, and it's ironic. From what I've heard, the Taliban have been playing more friendly with Russia than they have with China. But because
Mm,
we've pulled out the way we did in Afghanistan, China
yeah.
already kind of had infrastructure over there set up, and day one as it was happening, Russia was already beginning to kind of set up that infrastructure. So
Well,
it could get dicey
that's
over
the
in Afghanistan for Russia dealing with China.
yeah, I mean, you got to think. So, I mean, I don't think it'll ever like come to blows right now. It's way too convenient for them to be on each other's sides, especially when you're dealing with a powerhouse like the United States. But the United States is dying. So once it does die as the main power, then you'll start to see things like what you're saying. But it makes sense for Russia to go straight in because once the U.S. is not there, and they're not in the way of the Russians. The Russians can start dealing arms down there. I mean, that's a Russia cannot be a manufacturing power because they're so heavily sanctioned by Europe and the United States. That's where most of the consumers in the world are. That's where most of the money is. So they have to rely on things like natural gas. They have to rely on, they're like a surplus economy. They sell the natural gas. They sell the whatever crude oil that they have. Wheat's a big one for Russia, and guns. That's why you see like the Middle East, they're all having AKs and stuff. That's because Russia's the one selling that to them. That's the only way the country can make money, really.
Well, when you were talking about the sanctions, um, I can remember, and I don't. Maybe you were a little young for this, but one of the sanctions that really kind of forced Russia to play nice with other people was the American, just politicians in general,
Hmm.
conservatives, liberals, all of them, Obama leading the way, of course,
Of course,
sanctioned
yeah.
any kind of small arms from being able to be imported into the United States.
You've
And
told me about it. I don't remember. Yeah, I was probably too young, but
yeah, it was about
I know about it.
2011. And then the first thing that Biden did when he was in office was sanction the ammo. For whatever reason, those are separate. And they've found ways before to surpass that, where Russia will like send their ammunition and import them into smaller countries, leave them there for so long, they become somewhat of that country's import at that point, and then they send them to the United States. So Joe Biden just made that impossible, to where
Right.
anything that was manufactured in Russia was not able to be imported. So, as
Yeah,
far
and
as, like, their
here's the
small
thing,
arms
though.
dealing, and
You're
I
squeezing
want
a
that.
country that's already. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I like that was one of my biggest like, my one, guilty and greedy ask of Trump was actually to lift that restriction. Like, I would love to see Russian small arms be able to be imported into the United States.
Yeah, Trump didn't really focus on the guns as much. I mean, he really, but none of them do. None of the Republicans ever do. They always talk about it, but they never actually like really roll any of that back at all because they agree with it.
Yeah, well,
Most of
the
them. I
only
don't know if Trump necessarily did. I think Trump had his plate full, and then he had like Jared Kushner in his ear, like what worm tongue, like swaying the way that he thinks and like persuading him into like evil things.
Yeah, I mean, Trump fell for what every president, whether they fall for it or push for it, is irrelevant because they've all done it. Every president to be elected in the last like 40 years have implemented more gun control at some point, and
Right.
it when it becomes to a conservative, it's always they're kind of pushed
Well, and
because of
like guns,
some.
like I made a post the other day and I was joking, but I said, I almost wish that they would like ban all guns because I'm sick and tired of this like cringe like 2A shit where like some busted up thought is like carrying an AR like all sexy and shit. Like it's just so cringe, and it's like it's become like cliche, and it's become like some kind of a bullshit
So there's two
pop
things.
culture thing where it's like
There is something like that that's probably going to happen in January, and the gun community is split completely down the middle. So, the pistol brace thing has gone through its cycles in the last 5 years, and we've managed to kinda fight that off to the point where it's not publicly, like, viewed as a good thing for them to ban pistol braces. But
hmm.
now Joe Biden has just said, "Well, we don't really care what you think. We control enough that we'll just do whatever we want." So
Yeah,
come
well, he's vowed to do like a lot. If he wins the next election, he's vowed to fully ban like, assault weapons, as they say.
I mean, so
So,
what and he doesn't even need to be elected again. It's already in place. The documents have already been leaked. The infrastructure is already there. That's why he expanded the ATF. It's kind of sort of has a little bit to do with why he expanded the IRS. They're going to
right.
be so there are just an estimated 10 million Americans that own some type of AR platform with a pistol brace. So if you charge $200 tax stamps for 10 million individuals that probably have multiples of those, that's
Mm-hmm.
a huge portion of money. And so that's what they're banking on, but so that it is viewed publicly as a good thing, even by conservatives, they're saying
Right, because they're
in
still allowing you to
January,
do it.
well, yeah, in January, there's going to be an amnesty, which sounds like he's doing us a favor. So he's going to make the ATF not charge that $200, but you still have to submit those pistols to the ATF. So two things happen there. You're going to be put on a registry because it becomes an NFA item, and they're not supposed to hold registries. But the NFA, there's no argument to be made that the NFA is not a registry because you have to have the serialized individual firearm on a registry to be tracked, even out of county. So you can't even take it out of your county without letting the ATF know. So they are literally tracking firearms through the NFA. So you either register your pistol with the ATF, which now you're on a registry, or
Right.
you hand them over, which is, in my opinion, isn't an amnesty. He's just forcing us to either be put on a registry, but that's kind of just the groundworks. So the gun community is split because half of them are saying this is bullshit. We have to fight it. They can't do this. Uh, registries are illegal. We're not gonna fucking sign up for it. And the other half is saying this is a good thing because now you're gonna have 10 plus million Americans that have the opportunity to tell the ATF, guess what? If you're making my pistol brace illegal, I have no reason to follow your rules. I'll put a stock on it anyways, and I'm not going to register it. So 50% of the gun community is saying this needs to happen so we finally get off our asses and do something about it.
But it won't happen.
I
I
agree.
don't see it happening.
Well,
I
I
mean, I
agree.
wish it would, but in all reality, in all practicality, it's unless, and that's why I said earlier, unless there's like some kind of disaster that like where like Americans are like, you know, deprived of food, like we have like food insecurity in the sense that like people are starting to go hungry or like people can't get clean water. Unless anything like that happens, you're not going to see Americans stand up and do anything at all. Like they already crossed those lines back in the 90s, and they can cross them anytime they want. I think a big part of why they're not really moving on a lot of that yet is because they're just simply waiting for the boomers to die off. When the boomers die off, this will become a Democrat, like it will become a total Democrat nation. I mean, there will be no chance of Republicans ever winning once the boomers die off, and they are dying off. So
I mean, and that's kind of what I've been driving at for the last couple of podcasts is we just have to get over this idea that we should have to support that because they're Americans. Like, no, Americans kill other Americans every single day.
right,
Whether, and on both sides, you have criminals that go out and rape, steal, kill innocent lives. And then you have, the people who decide to be the barrier between that concealed carry, that kill other Americans that are looking to do unlawful things that cause harm to innocent life. But either
right.
way, you have to view that as Americans killing Americans. Because if we don't do this, it's going to be one more thing that the Democrats and the liberals have been doing for decades, that are allowing them to beat us everywhere else. And now they are dehumanizing conservatives. So when it comes to that point where shots are fired, the liberals are going to be able to take those shots while the conservatives are still
Yeah.
standing there going, I'm not going to kill another American. Like, fuck that.
Well, the other thing too is, I mean, I don't think that anything like that will even be a good thing, even if because you could say like, well, Americans need to stand up, and maybe like certain instances of like people like like let's say the vaccine, let's say like 70% instead of taking it like refused, then the government would back down. So like let's say there's this tax idea that you're saying, which this is the first I've heard of. I didn't even know that that was a thing, but the 200 tax dollar thing. And let's just say most Americans just downright didn't pay it, downright refused to, and the government backed off. I think that'd be the best way. But if it came to like shooting, this country would just turn into like another like Afghanistan for a couple of years, and either they would process us all out, or eventually, we'd just like die over generations because it would be a generational warfare. So I think the best thing we could do is just infiltrate the Republican Party and move it further right, and start legally doing our values in government. Because yeah, I think fighting, and it's like you said that, I mean, I don't know. I mean, Biden's kind of right. A lot of conservatives laugh at him when he says you need a jet, which that's a bit ridiculous. But I mean, when you have, even though they are like sloppy and everything else, I mean, they are an actual military. They are an actual trained people. They are like, they have endless amounts of money. They will squeeze us out. And is that really worth it? You know what I mean? So I think the best thing we could do is just try to infiltrate politics, try to get our values, Christian nationalist values, into politics as best as we can.
Well, it's something that all of the gun community just refuses to admit when they talk about, their biggest pushback was, oh yeah, you think we need F-15s to fight off the federal government? What about Afghanistan? What about Vietnam? What
Well,
about,
and they're right. I mean, they could. I mean, if it was like somewhat organized, which again, how would we communicate? You know what I mean? Like they've cut all that. Like in Afghanistan, the reason why they didn't couldn't intervene in like communication is uh, a technology issue. Like in Vietnam, we didn't have the necessarily have the technology, and secondly, we didn't totally run the country and control the like our government didn't totally run the country and control the infrastructure. They do that here. You know what I mean? They can easily get into your internet, see what you're doing. You know what I mean? So like it's in that aspect, it's not going to be that bad, but I do think that they could draw it out for maybe like 10 years, maybe like a whole generation of fighting,
so I think
10, 20 years. But I think eventually that they will just win. And I wouldn't, at that point, I wouldn't even want to be a part of it, because why? I, I would rather just live in a dark age and hope that in the future generations, things will change for the better, than like engage in that and have like my entire like inheritance, not inheritance, but my entire uh all my descendants killed and everything else. You know what I
I
mean?
mean, when it comes to fighting the federal government, so they have a point, where Afghanistan, Vietnam, those places were able to combat a the number one superpower in the world. And as far as a civil conflict between civilians and the federal military, so there's two things that I think a lot of people like misinterpret. One is the amount of casualties the civilians would take on our side would be devastating. It would kind of be
Oh
like
yeah.
what happened to Germans during World War II, where all their masculine, you know, uh, men that
Yeah.
were raising the children were killed off, and now they're all fucking fags. So,
Or they'll just process us slowly. You
but
know what I mean? And that's the smartest thing, and that honestly, that's what it
that's what
looks
they're
like they're gonna
doing.
do.
Yeah, well, that
I
is
mean
what
I
they're
mean, it
doing.
looks like that's what's gonna happen. It's just gonna be a slow process. There won't be any kind of like lines drawn, official like battleground. It'll just be a slow erosion, and just playing the long game. I do see that like Democrats are getting antsy with some of this stuff, but I don't know if that's incompetence or if like they know something we don't know. But
It's
uh,
just that
I
it's just they cannot control. They've never had to have discipline or control. So it's just like with anything to do with, sexuality. They get a little bit of a taste of it and they just go fucking nuts. It's like, crack, where they're like, "Oh, you're going to allow me to touch buttholes? Well, I'm fucking kids now." You know what I mean? It's like
yeah.
they can't help themselves. But going back to the civilians against like military things, all the gun community likes to think that we, even with the technology, that the civilians would win because of the numbers, because there's 300 plus million people that would be fighting against a million military people. But that's a misconception, because those 1 million military members have already made the decision to pull that trigger, whereas we might have the numbers, but we haven't decided, nor are a lot of us even capable of it. So you would like to
Well,
think that we have the numbers, but we really don't.
it's way less than 300,000. I mean, there's not 300,000 gun owners in the country. I mean, not everybody even owns guns, and of those people, are they? It's like you just said. Are they willing to? Are they gonna? You know, I just don't think that any kind of like war or anything kind of like civil war or anything like that would be beneficial. So like I really wouldn't personally advocate for any of that, because it's just going to end up with like your kids getting killed or you getting killed. Um, so I think the best thing we could do is do it everything legally. Go, you know, get people to run for office locally, run federally, just whatever we can do and start influencing things in the other direction. I mean, I think that's the only way forward, really, that is feasible.
I mean, I slightly
And I mean, Nick
disagree.
lays that out every night too.
We'll save that for another night, and maybe we'll talk about that and actually just debate each other, because I disagree. I think there's a couple of options we have there. That, for one, I think if enough people, which I don't have a lot of faith in, don't get me wrong, but I'm saying it is an option. Like, if enough people stood up during COVID, we could have
Hmm.
easily combated that and shut that shit
Well,
down.
that's what I was saying earlier. Yeah, like but again, like it wouldn't be violent. You know what I mean?
Well,
if
I
you
think we do need to use violence, though. And it's just not. I don't think it needs to be 300 plus million civilians against the federal military. I think it needs to be a couple 100,000 Americans, and we just kill one. Like, just let us kill Nancy Pelosi, so that we can strike like the actual fear that is needed into politicians, into doing what needs to be done. The problem with January 6th is it's the worst thing that ever happened for conservatives, and it's the best thing that ever happened for civilians, because the politicians there finally were able to see in real time that fear that they should constantly have. But now they've combated that to make us fearful. We should have used that to keep that ball rolling. Like, yes, it is we the people. Like, we could come in any fucking time and drag you down the steps and decapitate you. And we don't necessarily need to go
what?
a full-blown war. We just need to go in and take one. Like, fuck the podium, take that bitch's head. And I think we would, I think the federal government would be forced to, for if PR reasons alone, be like, okay, well, we can't kill these people because it's 300,000 of them. Uh, but they can't do it again. So then we would kind of be at a stalemate. So we would be forced to really be brought to the table and have this political conversation that all these fucking jerk off Republicans and Democrats talk about. It doesn't need to happen between Democrats and Republicans. It needs to happen about,
I don't know, man. I think that they would. I don't think they would back down at all. I don't think they would, and it's not even the politicians that mattered either. I mean, the politicians are really kind of a small part. You know, like there's still the military apparatus, the bureaucracy. They they could keep things moving even if the politicians are actually threatened, and I don't think they would be threatened. I think that would just not necessarily embolden them, but I think it would just be worse. I think it would end up being much worse if that would happen. Because I mean, do we really want to turn this into, I mean, that would give them the ultimate reason to just totally replace us, like genocide, like traditionally replace us, you know what I mean? I
well, and I
so
think
and
I think
And you
that's
got to think of this real quick. They cannot afford to look weak too. And you have to understand that's what, like, they'll look weak when it works for them, but if they truly look weak on the world stage like that, they can't afford that at all. So they I don't know. I think they would totally just do a police state if that happened. I mean, full on lockdowns, and
I
like
mean,
there'd be
so
no. And you saw how people acted under COVID. I mean, I think we'd be fucked if that happened.
well, you were saying like they're just going to do this slowly but surely over time. So the question really what you're asking is do you want to start this and potentially have, 5 to 10 years of chaos and working out the nuance of this and just get it over with? Or do you want to push that fight onto your children when they have a lot less to play with?
Well, I think that, and I'm gonna have to go to bed soon, but I think that the time for like what you're saying was like 20, 30 years ago. I just don't think that it's I just don't think it's plausible anymore. I mean, their tech, the way they can, I mean, you'd literally have to be like mountain people, like the Taliban, and I don't see that happening. I really don't. I see like small groups of people doing some things and then just like getting totally fucking wiped out. You know what I mean? I don't see that as a way forward. And
I think we're getting
also
wiped
you have
out
to
anyways.
understand. Well, maybe that I mean maybe it's inevitable, but um, the issue is. Oh shit, I lost my train of thought. I gotta go to bed though.
Yeah, I was gonna say we can talk about it some other time because I got to get off here as well. All right, man. Thanks for
Yeah,
stopping
maybe
by.
we'll have that debate or something, but I think you should kind of be a little bit careful
Well,
about what you're
that's
saying
my
online.
point. We are so brainwashed. We can't even say what needs to be
But it's not
said.
brainwashed, it's threatened.
I mean,
And until, I mean, it'd be very scary for either one of us to have like feds all in our fucking face and everything else. You know what I mean?
yeah, it's gonna get to that point anyways, though, man.
I mean that it's. I mean, you're probably not wrong, but
All right, man. I'll see
all
you
right,
around.
man. Yep. Bye.
All right. So that's just I like to get and bring him on a little bit just because it gives the other side of some conservative viewpoints. Like you could see towards the end there, we don't agree on everything. I think it's truly going to come down to that. And he's right. The time for what should be done was 20 years ago. And that's why we can blame this on the baby boomers because they didn't stand up and do what needed to be done. So now it is upon us to say, are we going to be the next generation of baby boomers? Are we going to stop this from happening so our children don't have to do this? And I think that's the big question. And I would like to think that uh, the majority of innocent protectors that still exist amongst us would like to believe we would take on the fight, whether that meant our death or not, to preserve a free, uh, filled with liberty country for our children and our children's children? Or are we going to pass the buck like the many weak that have come before us? All right, with that, guys, stay safe, stay prepared. I love you guys. God bless America.